Hello and welcome to Intro to Computer Games and Simulations. Is the mic working? Yes, I'm saying something right now. Can you hear me? Okay. Hello and welcome to the final lecture in Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College. We will be getting together one more time next week for the review of the final exam. Other than that, you have nothing new to learn. Today, we're going to be stepping outside of our textbooks mostly. We'll be talking something about Game Maker GML, the Game Maker language, and a little bit about object-oriented programming. The instructors in the classes that come after this one in the Computer Games and Simulation Design program have hoped that the students would be coming in with a little bit better understanding of object-oriented programming. So we're going to give you some of the words that you need to know in that to help you in your future classes. In the meantime, we're going to be covering some of the topics that you need to understand to make tic-tac-toe work and to make Pyramid Panic work, the last two Game Maker games you're going to be making in this class. So let's get right to the lecture today. The CGSD degree we have, you should be in this year here, taking this class, Intro to Computer Games and Simulations, and these other classes here, Intro to Computer Science, Math 171, Raster-Based Imaging, Psychology or Sociology, and SDEV 101. That's where we expect you to be right now. None of those classes require object-oriented programming. But once you start getting into these games, you will be doing object-oriented programming. As with the third semester and certainly the final semester, they're going to expect you to do some object-oriented programming. You're sort of doing a little bit of object-ish oriented programming right now in Game Maker, and let's get an appreciation for what you already understand today. Yes, all the classes highlighted in red are going to require a little object-oriented programming. Okay, and you can get a better taste for it by doing some programming in Alice, which is available for free. We used to require you to learn some Alice and do it at the end of the term. It's kind of fun. It's 3D. You can make a little first-person shooter in Alice pretty easily, but it was just too much of a burden to put a new language on you at the end of the term. Instead, we have you making tic-tac-toe and Pyramid Panic, which is more fun and easier. You can get Alice available for free, as I said last time, from Carnegie Mellon University. And you will not be graded for anything you do in Alice, but if you want to turn something in for extra credit, I'd be willing to look at it. All right, let's talk about what this thing, object-oriented programming, is. It's a computer programming concept based around objects. Object, we've got an image of the big legs there from Super Rainbow Reef. That would be an example of an object. It's data structure with data fields, methods, and interactions with other things in your program. This is some Alice code there showing objects, methods that go along with an object. That object would be called Sheriff. You could read that text there. Object-oriented programming. You've used objects previously writing your games in Game Maker. And we're going to go even deeper into the concept right now. An object is a bundle of data, functions, procedures. They're all related to some real-world concept. In the example shown on the screen there is a fighter plane from your Wingman Sam game that you wrote. Does Game Maker allow object-oriented programming? And there's some debate about that. Shorter answer is no, it's not really object-oriented programming because there are some things that Game Maker hides from you. The long answer is that sort of, because you do make an object-oriented programming. It's an object-oriented program when you make it. It's just that the Game Maker compiler has done a lot of that stuff for you, handled it without you knowing it. For example, inheritance. You did inheritance in your Game Maker programs where you have The mummy and the beetle are both inheriting from their parent object enemy in Pyramid Panic. That is a concept from object-oriented programming. So you've done a little bit. They're inheriting those characteristics from the parent. And GameMaker does call the enemy an object. In object-oriented programming language, enemy would be a class of objects, and the mummy and the beetle would be actual objects themselves. But both object-oriented programming languages and GameMaker will use the term inheritance to describe what happens between them. All right, objects of the same class will have many of the same properties. Important to understand that. You'll be quizzed and tested on that sentence. Objects of the same class will have many of the same properties. For example, a dragon will shoot out some fireball objects. And those fireball objects will have the same properties. They'll be moving in the same direction at the same speed. They'll do the same thing if they collide with a demon. So they have the same properties. Speed, direction, strength, etc. They make the sound effect. Each fireball is what we call an instance of the fireball class of object. Instance and class are important words to know. All right. Thus, each of the fireball instance is an instance of the same object. All right, let's consider those big legs from Super Rainbow Reef, because they don't have all of the same properties. They're not quite identical copies. The parent big leg is destroyed by a collision with the little starfish Pop. And when the program counts the number of big legs in the room, and when it reaches 0, you move to the next room. The child big leg inherits all those properties, plus moves. And when it hits the edge of something, it reverses direction. It goes back and forth on the screen. So it's got more properties. It inherited some, has more properties of its own. Like that, going back and forth on the screen. And that is where we learned about inheritance for the first time. All right, objects may also have what we call methods. Some languages call these functions, as GameMaker does. Methods define what an object can do. In Alice, they use the term methods. In GameMaker, we call it functions. They're also events and actions in GameMaker, as you see here, with the move fixed action and the events that can be associated with an object such as a koala bear in Koala Break. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the concept of methods. You can use a method in a program to make decisions. You can see object enemy there. If it has a collision with something, we'll execute a piece of code. What will happen if the explorer collides with these different objects here? It's going to have to make a decision. A method may repeat a sequence over and over. That's something called a loop, and we'll talk about loops more extensively, and loops are used a lot in programming, and you've used some of them already. GameMaker implies all of its loops. You don't need to code them, but things that happen over and over and over in GameMaker are sitting there everywhere in your code. For example, if the up key is pressed, then move forward in many games. And it keeps repeating. The up key is still pressed, keep moving forward. Up key still pressed, keep moving forward. Up key still pressed, keep moving forward. It's a loop. It goes over and over. Objects may also have what we call functions. GameMaker's functions are also events and actions. yeah, I hate to confuse you like this, but Game Maker's terminology is teaching you some bad habits as far as all other programming languages are concerned. Functions define what an object can know, whatever that means. For example, the explorer in Pyramid Panic can know whether or not it is touching an enemy. If there is a collision between the explorer and an enemy, then the function will determine that that's happening and decide what happens. Pyramid Panic has a class called Enemy, and that's defined as any object that kills one player life when it collides with an object explorer. So there are 3 types of objects shown here that are all of the class Enemy. And you can see if the explorer collides with any object called Enemy, it's going to execute that piece of code that you either have already written or will be writing in that. Object Enemy itself has no events and no actions. Isn't that amazing? Object Enemy doesn't do anything. The explorer does everything if it collides with the object enemy. Think about that as you're going through your code in the game. All of the events are in the object explorer. Right there. That executes piece of code. Let's look at that code. So, the code that executes when an enemy collides with the explorer, if you're able to read this, first thing it does is it plays the sound die. There's a sound effect in there for the dead explorer. Then it subtracts 1 from the number of lives that you have. Then it redraws the screen and pauses for 1,000 milliseconds, which is a second. And then it takes the X coordinate and the Y coordinate of the explorer to the start positions and snaps it at 3232, so it stays within the grid block, and destroys the instance of the object. All right, so in the scripting languages, the GML code, the steps that I just went through are going to be followed in order. It will play that sound effect. It will subtract a life, redraw the screen, pause 1 second, return you to the start position, and destroy that enemy that you collided with. Oops. All right, let's talk about, we're almost done now. Let's talk about this thing called the main loop. Programs all have main loops. Object-oriented programming, the concept is extremely important. The loop would be get input from the user. Check the keyboard, the mouse, maybe a network packet, whatever might, joystick, something might be giving you input. Change the image on the screen, do something, maybe move a catch around, play a sound effect, whatever, that's the output. Now Game Maker hides that loop of the things that are going on. Check for input from the user, generate some output. Check input from the user, generate some output. Game Maker hides it. You don't realize it's happening over and over, but it is. So a main loop in a program really looks like this. First you set up the game, that's set up your initial room in the case of Game Maker, and then you'll check the keyboard for input, then you go into the loop. So setting up the game is not part of the loop. In a Game Maker game, typically you'll check the keyboard. Then you'll update the variables. Say the keyboard said, move your explorer to the right. You'll move it to the right. And update the display. So the image of the explorer now moves to the right. So his X coordinate increased and the little image moved a little bit. And then check to see, did the game end? If it did, then that's it. If it didn't, come back, check for keyboard input, and go through the loop again and again and again. Here's what a main loop looks like in Alice code. I don't expect you to quite understand it, but at the top of the screen up there, actually, can we, in the control room, could we just go to full screen for this last slide here on television? So what we've got here under events are the keyboard input. The keyboard input, it's doing just what I was saying. It's looking for keys to be pressed by the user. So it's checking the keyboard input, and then it's doing this loop that will get executed over and over and over. It'll do together moving if you'll recall that Alice program we used last week where the tendons were moving and the fingers were moving. That's what this program is. So then it'll move all those things, increment the screen, and then it will check the keyboard again, move those things on the screen, check the keyboard again, move those things on the screen. We're going to step out of there right now and go into Alice. Here is the actual program in Alice. And you can see when the world starts, execute this thing called My First Method, which is all this code down here. I'll just let you see. This is the code. All these different, the nerves, the cycles, things like that. All right, let me remind you how this program worked. I'm going to hit play. And I'm going to rotate the image so you can see as those tendons are pulling, the fingers are moving. If I hit a keyboard, I can flex the wrist, which increases the friction in there and would begin irritating the sheaths of the tendons and will cause that nerve to become inflamed and eventually turn red. So as those fingers are flexing, we're going to see the nerve, I hope, get inflamed and get flexed in the other direction. That's fine, let's go the other way. So this is what the program does. Let's stop the program and just look at this loop that's going on. So this loop has got this do together. All these things will happen. It's going to move those fingers. It's going to move those tendons. It's going to check to see how long the wrist has been bent, how many times the fingers have flexed with the wrist bent, and it will change the color of the nerve to pink or to red or to yellow, depending on how irritated it is. And then it will go back to the top and run the loop again. This main loop will happen over and over and over in Alice. You don't see the loops in GameMaker. You do see the loops in almost every other programming language. I don't want you to learn the Alice code unless you're interested in it, but I wanted you to see an example of a loop. Going back to our presentation, thank you. That was the main loop in Alice, and we are done for the day. Next time, we will be back here for the final exam review. You're going to love it. It's a lot of fun. Everybody out there is invited to come for the final exam review, and it's going to be like a game show with response devices, and there will be prizes for the best scores, but there will be no consequences to getting the answers wrong. However, you will get a chance to see actual questions from the final exam. And if you can answer those questions, maybe you'll win a candy bar. All right, that's it. We'll see you next week here at Intro to Computer Games and Simulations at Lorain County Community College. Thank you.